Okay, we are back. Hi, second installment. Maura asked me to shout it out to her. Now, I know what a shout out is, and I thought that was like a new way of tweeting something or doing something, so I asked her, but turns out she just wanted me to mention her name. So, hi, Maura, how's it going? So, I hope everybody's having a good Monday. And we are going to start with the second new deal. And I'm going to walk you along, and we have a spot we're going to skip or something because we're going to talk about some of these in class because I want to have a discussion about Social Security and how you will all be broke because of your parents' generation. Okay, so we'll get there. So the second 100 days, spring of 1935, basically the big idea here is that FDR's momentum just keeps going. Like we said, he has all these Democrats in Congress. So he's just passing all these laws and not really being met with any resistance. And they help him do things in 1935, like raise taxes on the wealthy, continue stuff like the SEC, continue to keep an eye on those banks, and again, continue to roll out relief. Now, the Emergency Relief Appropriations Act, FDR wants to shift from giving people handouts to actually giving people something to do. And we mentioned in class today how that just feels better, especially for men at this time who are supposed to be, providing from your families to feel productive and to get a job, even if it's not very high wages, is going to be much more of an improvement than waiting in a bread line. So he continues to do that. And again, these are, immigrant working class people who really make up our country, who want that feeling, who want to feel useful, who want to feel productive, and who want to, have their work ethic put to good use. So we're going to pause and talk about the WPA in class because I really want to get into a discussion about some of those authors and stuff. But the Emergency Appropriations Act is just to continue to give jobs to people. That's the relief. The jobs are the really core part of that second R, which is relief. I want to mention the REA, another one of our alphabet soups, and that's the Rural Electrification Act. Now we know, even though light bulbs have been invented by Edison a long time ago, especially in poor rural areas, people do not have electricity. And this is going to give electricity to people in those regions, and believe it or not, people's electricity goes from 10% of people having light in rural areas to 90% because of this act. And again, this gives people jobs when people are the ones setting up the power lines, etc. So we're also going to pause on Social Security. We are not going to talk about that right now. I'm going to go right into reviving organized labor. So FDR, as we talked about in class today, with the Schechter Poultry case, he had to basically bug up his butt about the NIRA being kaput. So he wanted to kind of punch back and still give workers rights and still give workers something that they could stand on. So he comes up with the Wagner Act. And I want you to think about it like it's a Bill of Rights for workers. It basically is going to list all of the things that they are able to do. And among that, it gives them the right to bargain collectively, right? Which means you sit down with your employer, you tell them what they need to do, what you want from them. They basically have to hear you out. And it outlaws certain business practices. Something businesses were trying to do to get around people being unionized. They were like, oh, I'll make a union for you. No, you can't join a union that's put together by the person who employs you. Huge conflict of interest. It wouldn't work out. And they continue to give people the right to organize under the Wagner Act. And the muscle behind it, because we know if you have the Interstate Commerce Act, you need the Interstate Commerce Commission, right, to make sure people are going to follow those laws. So you have the Wagner Act, but now you're going to set up the NLRB. And that stands for National Labor Relations Board. And they're going to go into these workplaces and say, hey, worker, not boss, hey, worker, how are you being treated? Are you allowed to be in a union? What's going on with your wages? And basically, if they find out that a company isn't following the Wagner Act, they will make sure that they have to. So they're kind of enforcing this law, making sure that it's there. And I want to pause and talk about labor for a minute. You have John Lewis, the guy with the big eyebrows, right? I should talk. But he's going to really lead workers in this time. And he formed something called the CIO, and that's the Committee for Industrial Organization. Because as you can imagine, workers are not having a good couple of years during the Great Depression, right? And part of the CIO was the United Auto Workers. And we know that making cars in our, oh, hold on. Never mind, they went away. Making cars in making cars in our country is a huge deal. So the guys who work for GM had been, been refused to get their needs met. And in Flint, Michigan, a town that has been in the news a lot lately, in the same place, you have these workers go on a very interesting strike, and it's going to be called the GM sit-down strike in 1937. And the GM sit-down strike, they go to work, but then they don't work. So, like, think about if you guys were all on your desks and you weren't doing your work. I can't bring in new students to teach because you're occupying those desks. And if I try to forcibly remove you, which I would never do, my classroom could get destroyed. Except instead of my classroom, it's a plant with highly expensive equipment and materials. So they can't bring in the police to remove these guys because then they'll destroy the plant, and they don't want that. And they can't bring in scabs to take their jobs because they're physically there. They're like sitting on the assembly lines. These guys legitimately brought snacks and like bananas and newspapers and board games, and they hung out for forever. And it was genius, right? Michigan's asked to step in. They refuse. Police can't come in. And basically what happens is laborers are going to win this. And GM loses so much production. And I did the math. They're gone for 6 weeks. They cannot produce cars. They lose millions of dollars. That's 1,230,030 cars that they do not produce, which is crazy. So we're talking like 1.2 million cars that they don't make because these guys are on strike for 6 weeks. So this is a huge victory for labor. And you and I have not talked about victories for laborers yet, right? It hasn't been there. And you see this steadily increase. And by the time that we get to the 1940s, 1/4 of Americans' workforce will be unionized. So unions only continue to get stronger. And this is like finally a foothold for that. And you're going to see coal miners, these horrible conditions, everything like that, they continue to get things a little bit better. Not great, but a little bit better. So the election of 1936, FDR, if we take a look, he's sliced unemployment in half, right? With temporary jobs that don't pay a lot, but still, we said people feel in use. He has given hope to millions of people, recovery, but we're still in the Great Depression. We're still struggling with all of these issues. And it doesn't matter. FDR is so beloved. I mean, it matters, but people love him so much, he just comes right in. And something really big happens. Even though a lot of New Deal jobs are not given to minorities and not given to women because they're handed out at state level, right? So women forget it. They're not getting those jobs. But think about being black and in Alabama. And the New Deal jobs come down from Washington, D.C., but then at a state level, you hand out those jobs. So you can imagine they're all going to white laborers. They're not really going to black laborers, but some are going to get them. And also, you really see African Americans, like a lot of other people, believe in FDR at this time. And we're going to talk about other things that FDR does that, give them that vote of confidence for him. So huge historic moment. Your black community in America has always voted Republican up until this time. Why? Did you guess it yet? Lincoln, ending slavery, right? Lincoln was a Republican, Lincoln ended slavery, and that was like a firm loyalty. You have African Americans vote Republican, but now big shift to the Democratic Party. So this election in 1936 is a very historic switch from the African Americans in our nation voting Republican to now voting Democrat. And that loyalty really still continues to this day. You're really still going to have most of your black community in America vote Democrat. That's just how it goes still in elections. So keep that in mind. When FDR comes in, he is off to a bad start. If you remember, the courts upset him before because they put the brakes on a lot of his programs, and now he basically says, oh, why don't we make some changes to the Supreme Court? And he tries to pack the courts. What he essentially comes up with is a very poor attempt to say, I'm reorganizing the executive branch. And then he gives himself the power to add 6 more Supreme Court justices to the original 9. Clearly, he's going to stack the Supreme Court with his supporters, so he doesn't have any issues like he did with Schechter and Butler in the past. Now, this does not pan out. He gets a ton of criticism for this. People freak out. People say he's challenging the balance of power. It doesn't happen. But still, keep in mind, this is where we can look at FDR and be like, what? We thought you were a saint. What are you doing? You're definitely toying with the balance of power. And people know why he's doing it. He's not doing it to reorganize stuff. He's doing it because he wants his way. So that's not going to go down well. Some good is done in this time. The Farm Tenancy Act, if you remember, under the AAA, there was a subsidy. So picture it's like Mississippi, you're a sharecropper, and you're black, And now it comes down from the government that some of these crops have to not be grown or lie fallow. That's the word in agricultural terminology. So your white sharecropper boss, is he going to tell the white guy not to grow the crops or you? He's going to tell you not to grow crops, right? So these guys were getting really hurt. So the Farm Tenancy Act is to try and help the sharecroppers. And this is, under the Farm Tenancy Act, a chance for them to buy their own land. So this is going to be a big deal. And again, it's a drop in the bucket. Like we talked about Indian Reorganization Act, drop in the bucket. Something like the Farm Tenancy Act helping African Americans, drop in the bucket. Because really minorities are not given these New Deal jobs in a big way, but it's something. But FDR is going to be operating with what we call a deficit budget. A deficit budget is where you are spending more than you are bringing in. So if I go to the store with $30 in my pocket and I charge on my credit card $75 and I only have $30 to my name, I'm now in a deficit budget. Some economists, such as John Maynard Keynes, it's actually called Keynesian economics, Keynesian, they'll tell us that a deficit budget can be good because if you keep spending, eventually things will go up, right? Because the more you're spending, the more confidence people have in the economy, and they're like, wow, the government's spending, there are jobs, I'm going to spend. However, at some point it needs to turn up, right? So this deficit budget, my point is you can't have a deficit budget forever because then you're just going to have no money, and then you're just spending all the time more than you have. So by the time we get to 1938, that starts to set in as a reality, but by the time we get to 1938 as well, things are already cooking in Europe and the makings of World War II are already on their way, right? And we're going to start producing for that, and we said the bottom line, that's how we get out of the Great Depression. But things aren't looking wonderful for FDR right before those moments. So I want to, when we talk about life in the New Deal, that next section, section 3, I want to skip over talking about women because we're going to do that in class. I do want to talk about African Americans, and this has a lot to do with why this vote switches to the Democrats, right? So lots of history being made here. William Hastie is named as the first black federal judge ever in U.S. history under FDR. Mary McLeod Bethune is going to be part of FDR's unofficial black cabinet. They were a group of black community members, politicians who met with FDR and basically said, this is what's going on, this is happening in the South, here are the lynching numbers, you should know this, you should know that. And again, even though most African Americans do not see big benefits from the New Deal programs, there is a feeling that the Democratic Party and FDR are sticking up for them in ways no one has before. It's not everything, but it's something. And this alone is going to be enough for that vote of confidence. No one's had a black cabinet. No one's cared. We go from Woodrow Wilson putting down anti-lynching legislation to FDR meeting with people to talk about it. That's a big change. That's something big. And, we're going to talk about this in class. FDR is dealing with a very Democratic Solid South party to get himself elected, and he can't vocally maybe be as pro, all these civil rights and all these crusades like his wife Eleanor can. He can just say, oh, she's Eleanor, and that's what she's doing, but he has to continue to get elected. So we're going to talk about the deals you make when you come into office. But even with his constraints, he does a great deal to help African Americans at that time. So I want to skip talking about the Great Depression in the media. I want to show you some of those movies and pictures and stuff in class. So go all the way to analyzing the New Deal. And this is the very last bit. If we take a good hard look at the New Deal today, basically, did it work? And the answer is complicated. The answer is no, really, because World War II is going to end the Great Depression. But I guess that's no from a purely economic standpoint. If we're looking for, did it help? Did it give us our confidence back? Did it help us trust our government? Then the answer is yes, right? Not that it solved everything economically, but that it did a great deal of good for us when we needed it. Cold hard look at facts. Unemployment was 25% when FDR came in. It went on to 14%, and it was 18% in 1938. So that's not great. And we still argue, did FDR do too much? Was he too unconstitutional? Did he take too much power? Did he not do enough? Should he have had more, efforts to help people? What do we still have today? We said we have the FDIC today to ensure up to $250,000 in the bank of our savings. We have the SEC to watch over the stock market. We always need that. We obviously have Social Security. We have the legacy of all these buildings, right? All the WPA, the artwork, the roads, the bridges, all this stuff. And we have the big takeaway too of a different relationship with the American people. Now, because of the New Deal, when the American people are upset, when something is wrong, when we have unemployment, when we don't have good health care, we turn to the government and we say, what are you going to do? It wasn't usually like that. It was very laissez-faire. But now we turn to the government because that's the model that was set up for us of government intervention from the New Deal. Now that's just kind of what we expect. And unlike Harding and Coolidge, FDR was sweating, doing everything he could for us, right? So now we got into that habit of turning to the government. Now the price we pay for that is a lot of government intervention in our lives. The government has certain information about us. We have a social security number, the taxes we pay, all of that stuff. And also, they're going to spend more money. So this means a more intervening, more money spending government. And some people praise this, some people fear it. Do they have too much power? Do they not have enough? But either way, this is a major takeaway from the New Deal. And limits of the New Deal jobs. First of all, we said they don't really go to minorities. Second of all, they are not permanent, right? You're not going to have this for forever. You can't climb through the ranks and start a career. This is just for now. And we said they're pretty discriminatory. They're definitely not for any women. And they're really just mostly going to white males. As the New Deal ends, one more thing happens that we still have today, and that's the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938. And the big takeaway from that is it's minimum wage. It establishes that we will have a government minimum wage. That's what that does. And FDR's trying to rally new congressmen in 1938, get people to accept what's going on and say, hey, let's pass this next. And people are running out of steam. But then, bam, World War II, right? And then our production in World War II, the making of tanks and uniforms and guns and all this stuff, first selling it to Europe and then actually using it ourselves, that's what gets us out of the Great Depression. It's not going to really be FDR, and everyone's attentions are turned, but he does a lot. He does a lot at that time, and we still have so many things that we still have today from the New Deal. And again, most of all too, that different style of government that intervenes heavily in our lives, that heavily spends a lot of money, and that we turn to heavily in times of crisis. That's it. I did an awkward salute last time. I'm just like, okay, I don't know what that is, but I hope you guys have a great Monday night. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.